Good morning to everybody. We will continue with our discussion on environmental ethics. Last week in this session we started discussing environmental ethics, and we looked at certain aspects of that. Particularly, we looked at traditional Western ethical perspective, and which is anthropocentric, and then how it originates from basic Christian teachings. So, and then we also looked at this concept of value, something having an intrinsic value and instrumental value. These two concepts I explained to you last week. They are important for us to understand some of the ideas we are discussing in this session. Particularly when we look at environment, a question that is raised in the Western ethical discussions is whether environment has an intrinsic value or whether environment has only an instrumental value. Instrumental value, as you know, is whether environment is important for us as a means to something, not an end itself, or whether it has its own value apart from it being useful to us. So instrumental value is something is instrumental as a means. Something is important for us to do something else. But then intrinsic value is to have some value which is fundamental and basic. So these two concepts we discussed, and then we looked at what is called animal ethics. One of the leading modern advocates of animal ethics is Peter Singer. We looked at those ideas, and then also we saw in the Buddhist tradition animals, non-human beings, in certain sense considered to be equal to human beings, where we take all beings. Now, it doesn't mean that animals, reptiles, birds, and all these are equal to human beings, but in certain respects, particularly in certain fundamental things. For example, all living beings love their life. All living beings do not want to die. All living beings love happiness. So, looking from these perspectives, all beings are the same. Of course, there are some other ways human beings are different from other beings. But in that fundamental sense, because all beings are same, we say, Sabbe Satta Bhavantu Sukhitatta. May all beings be well and happy. Now, there, when we say may all beings, Sabbe Satta, it is not Sabbe Manusa. It's not all human beings, it's all sentient beings. Now, on the other hand, there can be differences between human beings and animals, okay? Now, we will start today from individual living organisms. This term refers to such entities as trees and plants. Some ethicists argue that moral considerations should be extended to include individual living organisms because such organisms have inherent value of their own. Now, this view says, this particularly how the Western ethical discussions articulate it, they say that even trees and plants, individual living organisms, have their own value. So, they draw this conclusion on different grounds. Albert Schweitzer says that all living things have a will to live. Paul W. Taylor says that all living things are teleological centers of life. With some good they strive to attain, although they may not have any awareness of that. Now, these are different Western ways of articulating this idea. Like trees and plants, they argue that they are also living beings. Now, when a person like Paul W. Taylor says that they are teleological centers of life, teleology means the view that everything moves towards a purpose. That's teleology. Achieve some kind of purpose. So they argue that trees and plants have their own value. They are moving towards some kind of purpose, although they do not have knowledge about it. Now, these are different ways of saying that trees and plants are also valuable, and also they deserve moral consideration. In other words, we have a moral duty towards them. Now, similar Indian view is Indian philosophy Jainism attributes some type of life to plants, and hence they include the plant life in their moral considerations. Buddhism does not accept this position. Now, if you look at this idea, even Jainism comes close to the modern view. Jainas believe that trees and plants have a certain form of life. Actually, there is no doubt that all the living plants, trees and plants and these objects have some form of life. But the question is whether these things have any kind of sentience or some kind of consciousness. Now, Buddhism doesn't say that there is consciousness for these trees and plants. But modern ethics and also Jainism seem to be saying that there is some form of life which is close to some form of consciousness. Actually, the interesting thing is whether these things come into our moral considerations, whether trees and plants have to be considered morally, or if we cut a tree or something, are we doing some kind of harm to the tree? This depends on actually how we look at it. Okay? Now, basically, fundamentally, we have to accept that trees and plants are different from sentient living beings. Now, animals are sentient living beings. Although trees and plants have a certain form of life, they are not really sentient living beings. Now, if you look at a growing tree and piece of firewood, we say that the piece of firewood is not a living organism, but a tree or plant is a living organism. Okay? But living in the sense it grows and it exists, right? But whether it has a conscious existence. Now, if it doesn't have a conscious existence, according to Buddhism, you don't have moral consideration in a manner similar to the moral consideration you have towards animals. For example, killing an animal or even an insect is wrong because they feel pain. Okay? Animals feel pain. Even the smallest insects feel pain. But do you think that the trees and plants feel pain? Yeah, this is the situation. Now, if they feel pain, if they are conscious about it, then of course you will have to consider these objects as deserving moral considerations. But the modern ethicists try to show that all these things ultimately not only individual living organisms, even if you take rivers, oceans, mountains, rocks, even these things. In other words, some of the modern ethicists want to say that everything existing in the universe, in the world, has certain towards, I mean, we need to have a moral consideration towards them, or we need to treat them as individual living beings so that we are morally responsible. What we are doing to them can be good or bad. Now, these are very important things. In a way, you can say that this form of thinking is very good for nature, because then you are dealing with nature very carefully. But the Buddhist position seems to be that when you look at the trees and plants, of course, these things we are making use of these things. Okay? But as things we are making use of, these things have some kind of instrumental value to us. But at the same time, they are part of the nature. Now, if you destroy nature, it will affect you in an undesirable manner, bad manner. Okay? And also, you can, when you do that, when you say wantonly destroy the nature, then of course, what is your mental condition? So even according to that, you can say, it has some kind of good and bad involved in that. But Buddhism doesn't believe that, there is, we should really have moral considerations towards this, what is called individual living organism. But anyhow, this idea, so some people say that trees and plants have will to live. Some others say that they are teleological centers of life. And then Jainisms believe that trees and plants have some form of life. So the human life or animal life is, according to Jainism, different only in degree, not in kind. But according to Buddhism, the difference is actually two types. In Buddhist view, in order for something to be considered as a living being, satta, it should have life, heat and consciousness. Ayu, usma and vijnana. Plants do not have consciousness. Hence, they are not treated as moral agents. So, according to Buddhist analysis, to say that something lives, it has to have ayu, usma and vijnana. Now, death is defined as when ayu usmacha vijnanam yada kayang jahantiman. When ayu, usma and vijnana leave this body, we are dead. So, now we can't say that the plants have consciousness. So, hence they are not treated as moral agents. Now, interesting thing is, look at the next one. This, however, does not mean that Buddhism does not care about trees and plants and other natural objects. The Jataka says that one who damages a tree under the shade of which he rested is a wicked traitor. Mitta dubbhihi papaku. The Buddhist literature says that the Buddha spent 1 week looking out of gratitude at the Bodhi tree, which served him as a seat at the time of his enlightenment. Now, if you look at these things, in the Jataka it is said that yassa rukhassa chayaya nisideya sayayava. If a person were to sit or lie down under the shade of a tree, natassa sakang bhindeya. One should not break the branches of that tree. If you do that, you are a mitta dubbhi. You are an ungrateful person. Now, that shows that if you were under a tree, under the shade of a tree, then you must really look at gratefully. Now, that is one way to look at it. But does this mean that really, you are having some kind of mutual moral connection, relationship with the tree and yourself? I mean, tree doesn't know whether you slept under its shade, or tree doesn't know whether you are grateful or conscious about it. However, on your part, you have to be feeling grateful to the tree, because otherwise, if you don't feel grateful to the tree, you will not also feel grateful to a person who helped you. Okay? So it is one thing that human beings can treat these objects in a moral manner. You can feel gratefulness. Now we are told that Buddha was Animisalochana Puja. Buddha was looking at the Bodhi tree because it helped him to sit down, and then he attained the enlightenment. So it is said that Buddha was looking at this tree for 7 days. Now these are human, good human responses. Okay. At the same time, we can have bad human responses also. Sometime I may be walking down here, and then I may hit my feet here. Then I get angry, and then I smash this. Okay? People do that. But then, does the table really react to you? Where you got angry because you got pain. But it is your fault, not the table's fault. But we smash the table or we kick the table. But by that we get more pain in our leg. Okay? But so that means that towards nature we can behave morally. But that doesn't mean that table has some kind of the moral conscience. Okay? Because now if you get angry, you will kick it or smash it or something. But then by doing that, you are not really, by smashing a table, you are not really doing a papa. But that is a akusala. That's not a wholesome mentality because you have dosa or anger. So you react by anger. That is wrong. But on the other hand, it is not to be, some kind of reciprocal, mutual moral consideration is not there. In other words, what I am saying is, you need to make a distinction between it is good for us to be ethically, kindly, mild manner to behave towards nature. Okay? Now, but that doesn't mean that you have an ethical relationship with. Okay? So it's a subtle distinction. Now about the trees and plants, you can look at in a humane and kind manner. Now the Buddhist position has to be understood carefully. The examples referred to include that although trees and plants, being unconscious, are not moral agents, human beings who are moral can act in moral or immoral manner towards them. In the first example, one who breaks branches of a tree under which he rested is morally evil, because that behavior represents similar behavior towards sentient living beings. A similar example is smashing an object which one accidentally hit and experienced pain. The second example represents the opposite morally good behavior towards all sentient beings. This means that human beings can behave towards objects as they are moral agents. Now, the distinction is this. It is one thing to say that, these objects, trees and plants, have some form of life that is similar to our own life. And therefore, we need to treat these things moral. Buddhism doesn't accept that. But on the other hand, even though there is no life, these are not living organisms in that sense, still our own behavior can be motivated by some kind of moral thinking. Okay? Something maybe for a long time, we develop attachment, some kind of, the positive mentality towards objects we are using. Suppose you are living in one place. After a long time, you are leaving that place, you feel bad about it. So, you develop, some kind of attachment to that place. Similarly, towards objects, we develop some type of attachment, some kind of sense of gratefulness. So which is a very important thing, but it is different from considering them as some kind of moral agents. The whole problem is this. If you think that trees and plants have life, then how can you cut them and build houses? Okay. Now, of course, when you cut trees and build houses, or when you cut trees and make use of for your furniture and all these things, you have to be considerate. You have to be considerate, particularly about the nature and also the beauty of the nature, protection of the nature, and the environment and all these things. We have these ideas. Now, for example, in Sri Lanka, we have this tradition, you pluck flowers from trees to offer to the Buddha. But we always say that leave some to the tree. You don't pluck all the flowers. Okay? You don't pluck all the flowers of the tree. You leave some flowers to the tree. And then the people in the ancient times got milk from the cows. But you always leave milk for the calf. You don't take the whole entire milk of the cow for your drinking. You always leave milk for the calf, because basically the milk is for the calf. But today, this dairy industry in a large scale farms, extremely inhuman. They attach to the udder. They fix this machinery thing, and you get entire milk of that animal. It's very mechanical and no control of that. So actually you don't even feel like drinking this milk that you can find in the supermarkets and all that, because it's a huge industry where you get the whole milk, entire amount of milk from the cow. But then in the ancient tradition, people didn't do that. You always were considerate, so you have ethics towards, of course, that's animal. But then about the trees also, you have the same thing. So, this considering trees and plants in this manner. Now, the popular Indian tradition has the following statement. This is a translation of a Sanskrit stanza, shloka. Trees bear fruits to help others. Rivers flow to help others. Cows milk to help others. In the same manner, this body is to help others. So this sentiment is not confined only to Buddhism. Now, this is a translation of a Sanskrit sloka, which goes as, trees bear fruits to help others. Paropakaraya phalanti vrukshah. Rivers flow to help others. Paropakaraya vahanti nadyah. Cows milk to help others. Paropakaraya duhanti gavah. Finally says, this body is to help others. Paropakararthamidang shariram. So look at the way they see the manner they look at the nature. Now you look at trees bearing fruits to help us. You look at rivers as helping us. You look at cows as helping us. Now, that is a very beautiful, very meaningful way to look at nature. Then you think that rivers are flowing in order to help us. So you are kind and nice to the river. You don't destroy the river. And you look at the trees. Trees are growing to give us fruit, to help us. But of course, this is not that trees really are conscious that trees are giving fruits to us. But this is a way we should look at it. Okay? Then we should look at it in a grateful manner. Look at the tree as giving fruit to you. So in that sense, you have a respect towards tree and you have a respect towards the nature. So you look at the cows as giving milk to you. Now today, the whole attitude is different. We raise cows and we get the milk in their maximum period, and then you slaughter them for the meat. I mean, this is completely not looking as cows as helping us, just looking as cows as just things from which you get milk, and then after that which you send into the slaughterhouse. So, these two perspectives. Now, this particular shloka is not really a Buddhist tradition, but that is an Indian tradition. So, basically you can see that not only in Buddhism, in general in the Indian tradition, you have this love towards nature. Another way to explain the moral relationship will be to say that one's treatment of these objects can be kusala or akusala, but not punya or papa. Because by cutting a tree, one is not committing a papa. Cutting a tree is not killing a tree, for only the sentient being can be killed. But this is not to deny that by donating it, one may do a punya, or by using it to crush a sentient being, one may do a papa. But the particular object has no role in such actions. Now, second paragraph again. Another way to explain the moral relationship is to say that one's treatment of these objects can be kusala or akusala, but not punya or papa. Now, in other words, what we are trying to say is this. By cutting a tree, you are not committing a papa. Okay? By cutting a tree, you are not committing a papa, because the papa is to do something in this sense, to kill a sentient being. Okay? By cutting a tree, you are not killing a tree, because we don't consider it to be killing. But you are cutting a tree in order to for you to use it. Now, according to Buddhism, that is not prohibited. That is not wrong. But on the other hand, if you cut all trees, if you cut unnecessarily, if you destroy, then of course, according to Buddhism, also that is wrong. But that is wrong not because you kill somebody, but because you are being selfish. You are being inconsiderate. And then you are being not caring about others. You are being not caring about the nature. And also you are being not caring about the future people who can use these things. So there are many ways you are doing something wrong. So which can be described as akusala, but not papa. Now this is one way to look at it. Because if you kill a human being or if you kill an animal, we say it is a papa. Okay? Cutting tree is not a papa. But cutting tree can be kusala or akusala, skillful or unskillful. If you cut a tree that belongs to somebody else, then what you have is lobha. And also what you are doing is stealing. So that is not killing, that can be stealing. So with these things, you can do good and bad things. You cut a tree and donate it to somebody who needs to build a house. Now that is a good deed you did, punya kamma. But you cut a tree and use it to crush somebody, then that is a papa. So with the using these things as instruments. What I am trying to show you is this. Now in the modern ethical discussions, you have this idea that individual living organisms or things like trees and plants have to be considered as moral agents. But Buddhism does not think these things as moral agents. Now even during the time of the Buddha, even Jainism seemed to have thought that they are treated in a moral manner. So Buddhism doesn't think so. But on the other hand, with all these examples, what you can see is your behavior can be good or bad, moral or immoral towards these things. But the distinction between whether your bad behavior is a papa or whether it is a akusala, okay? Now that is very important. In our discussion on kusala, akusala and punya papa, if you look at carefully, as putujjana, ordinary people who have lobha dosa moha, our lives can be always akusala. But then according to Buddhism, although akusala can be there in our existence, if we don't have papa, I think we don't need to worry about it very much. Not that worry about in the sense, otherwise, according to Buddhism, there will not be any way to ordinary putujjana human beings to be good people. Because we always have lobha dosa moha. Depending on our putujjana nature, we always have the lobha dosa moha. But then simply having lobha dosa moha, we are not really doing papa necessarily. So there is a very clear distinction between that. Okay? Now for example, I get angry. But if I do something, then only I am doing something wrong. But if my mind that I am angry is in a way natural. Because all the ordinary people have anger. So all the ordinary people have lobha, dosa and moha all the time. Okay? But that doesn't mean that unless you do something really bad, you are committing an akusala. Okay? Otherwise, according to Buddhism, all the ordinary putujjana people should go to apaya after the death. No, it is not like that. So there is a very important distinction between kusala and akusala and punya and papa. Okay? Because ordinary putujjana people, we will not be able to live without akusala. Lobha dosa moha. Lobha dosa moha is always there. But then we can live without putting lobha dosa moha into moral violations like 5 precepts, killing, stealing, and things like that. So this distinction has to be understood very clearly. The distinction is like treating nature. You can treat nature compassionately, humanely, and kindly, okay, and also wisely. But that doesn't prevent you using these aspects of nature for your existence. We grow things and we eat. Okay? So if we think that trees have their fruits only for the tree, then we will not be able to survive. But we believe that of course trees have to have fruits for their own sake, for their own, and also fruits can be used by human beings. It depends on how we treat the nature. If you completely destroy the tree in order to get the fruits, then of course you are doing something bad. But the badness have to be decided not only from your mental disposition when you do that, but also how it affects the nature, how it affects the future people. When you destroy a tree, how it affects the people who are even still not born. All these things are there. So to consider morality is something very specifically important in this context, making a distinction. In other words, what I am trying to show you is there is a difference between the Buddhist position and also the Jaina and the modern ethical position. Okay? So basically how we treat individual objects is something very important. Now then we move on to the larger objects, but I think the matter here is clear to you because moral, whether these individual living agents can be deserving moral consideration is something we need to be thinking very carefully. Now, what are the holistic entities? This category includes what is sometimes called land ethics. Sometimes it is called land ethics. The view that not only individual objects, but also lands or the earth that contain all the beings and objects should be treated as deserving moral consideration. Aldo Leopold, who proposed this view, defined right and wrong in the following manner. A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability and beauty of biotic community. It is wrong when it tends to do otherwise. One word is missing. A book called Sand Country Almanac and sketches here and there, Oxford University Press special commemorative volume, initially written in 1949. So here holistic entities means larger entities. Larger entities like lands, rivers, mountains and things like that. Now originally this idea in the Western tradition was proposed, this book was written in 1949, now almost 70 years ago. And it talks about not only trees and plants, we need to be ethically, morally thinking about even holistic entities like lands and the larger entities. What is the Buddhist position? In fact, here we are talking about 4 different things about nature. Now, the initial thing is we have human beings, that's one level. Then we have other sentient beings. Then we have what is called individual living organisms, that means trees, plants, etc. And then we have holistic objects, that means lands, hills, rivers, oceans, etc. Now, when we talk about environmental ethics, we didn't talk much about the human beings, but of course human beings included, and then other sentient beings. Here we have animals, and then individual living organism, trees, plants, and then we have holistic objects. Now other sentient beings, basically we talk about animals, birds, reptiles, etc. So here in this category you can see that in this classification you can see that entire nature can be included in these categories. If you look at the world, in this world human beings are living, other beings like cats and dogs and all the animals live, and also individual living organism, trees, plants, creepers, these things are there. And then holistic objects means these things are on earth, and then there are mountains, rivers, oceans, all these very large objects. Now, in other words, we are talking here, when we say environmental ethics, basically we are not talking about human beings, because human beings we consider separately. But when we talk about the environmental ethics, basically particularly in modern ethics, we are talking about the other living beings other than human beings, that means animals, birds, reptiles and all that, and then individual living organism, trees, plants and all these things, and holistic objects, lands, hills, rivers, oceans, mountains and things like that. Now when we think about ethical philosophy, now modern ethicists try to say that not only for animals but also for these things we have to have moral consideration. Now the interesting thing is, of course, about human beings there is no doubt, but other sentient beings, like if you take animals, birds and all these things, the standard Christian story in the Bible is that all these things were created by God for the use of human being. Now in that sense, in the Western tradition, for a long time they were not really considering even animals, okay? Now the animals were considered to be some kind of automata. Automata means something like, the wound object, like you wind it and then you act it. It's something like that. So animals were not conscious. Animals were not considered to be conscious. They are just moving objects. The difference between tables and chairs and animals, according to that view, was tables and chairs don't move unless we move them, but animals are moving. So animals are moving objects. But we know that Buddhism and the Indian tradition was very different. It considered animals to be conscious, animals to be similar to human beings in certain respects. So the animal ethics is not at all something new. But the animal ethics, now Western tradition going away from the standard classical Western tradition of considering animals to be automata, they went out from that and start considering animals as sentient beings. Now Peter Singer and these ethicists emphasize that aspect. And then other ethicists, they also wanted to build up a case for individual living beings and holistic objects. Now the important thing for us when we look from a Buddhist point of view, actually make this distinction, okay? On the one hand we have human beings, then we have animals, and then we have the nature. Now how should we behave towards these things? Okay, looking at the Buddhist position, is it any different from how it treats the objects without consciousness? Now Buddhist position about particularly these what is called holistic objects. In treating objects without consciousness, whether they are trees or plants or lands, Buddhism does not use such categories as intrinsic value or teleological concept of good which they strive to attain. But Buddhism may treat these objects mildly, moderately, thinking about the welfare of the other human beings, including those who will be born in future, also animals. Now the issue is this, when we, now Buddhism doesn't have an issue about sentient beings, animals, birds and reptiles and all that, okay. Now if we look at Karani Metta Sutta, Dighava, Ye Mahantava, Majjhima, Rassaka, Anuka, Thula, all these things actually refer to this kind of animals. And then we have Apadake me mettan, mettan dipadake me, chatuppadehi me mettan, mettan bahuppadehi me. So it includes scorpions, millipedes, centipedes and all these types of insects and everybody. So this doesn't have an issue. But the important thing is about these two things. How should we really consider? Now Buddhist position seem to be quite different from this modern ethical position. In the modern ethical position, in some sense, is very similar to, in some respects, to Jaina view, to consider trees and plants have some form of the conscious life, okay, and then holistic objects like these things. Now how should Buddhism? Now in treating objects without consciousness, now these two groups are objects without consciousness. Whether they are trees or plants or lands, this last aspect. Buddhism does not use such categories as intrinsic value. Now, in the Western tradition, they used to say that the concept of intrinsic value. A tree has its own value, and then as against instrumental value. Actually, this concept of intrinsic value, to say that a tree has a value on its own is we can say it is a Western way of looking at. It's a different way of looking at. Now, when you say that a tree has its own value, so therefore we have to be treating the tree as if you are treating another human being or something. Now, the question is, who contributed this concept of value? It is our conception, right? It is the human beings who attribute these things to the nature. Not that, the nature has these things. In other words, what I am trying to say to you is, when we use this distinction between intrinsic value and instrumental value, actually that is a distinction we are making. We say that tree has value. And important thing is this. Now, what is the situation of human being? How should human being behave? Now, actually, according to the Buddhist position, now animals have a conscious life. So you have to be really, because they can react. So therefore, there is some type of, the moral relationship. But with plants and trees and other objects, in fact, it is we are the people who are giving value to these things, okay? And then human beings are the people in the nature who can think and who can make decisions and who can think rationally. Now, if that is the case, it depends on how we look at these things and how we treat them. I don't think we can put human beings and all these things on a similar footing, okay? There are some very important differences. Now, because the human being is the one who can think, who can rationalize, who can morally develop, now it is up to the human beings to determine a way to behave towards the nature. How should we behave towards the nature? Okay? Now, we can't wantonly destroy nature, because that can be that can be a result of our own greediness. Now, if you look at the world today, you can see that people are cutting trees, all the forests, for the timber, and selling these timber to get money. Now, in this country, if you look at Myanmar, it is a huge problem. Logging is a huge problem. People go into the huge forest and cut trees and sell. Now, that is a very, very bad way to behave towards nature. But why do you behave towards nature like that? Because your greediness. Okay? Now, if you did not have your greediness, then of course you will not cut trees like that. But on the other hand, suppose you want to build a house in order to live, then you are cutting a tree. Now, that can't be wrong. Okay? Now, this is the finer distinction we need to make. Now, if you act out of greediness, act out of hatred towards nature, then of course that is morally and ethically wrong. But on the other hand, within certain limits, in order for you to live, you can make use of the resources in the nature, isn't it? In order to build your houses, you can use these resources, but not to wantonly destroy. But even when you are making use of the nature in order for your own use, you can say that you do it moderately. Why do you do it moderately? I mean, being in moderation is a good thing. But not only that, there are many other people who want to share these things. They also need to have these resources, not only you. Not only the other people, what about the people who will be coming in future? Your children, your children's children, next generations. Now who are going to use this? They also have to use these things. Now we are using these things because the people who lived before us, they planted these things. If so, then we have also a duty to plant these trees for the future generations to use. So there is no doubt that human beings can behave morally towards nature. But then that doesn't mean that these aspects of nature has some kind of sentient living or something. So we need to make a distinction between the two. But if you say that trees are also sentient beings, you can say that, okay, very easily you can say that then you should behave morally. But then the issue is you will not be able to touch anything. How are you going to live? How are you going to eat? We are eating the fruits of trees. How will you be eating them? Moment you are eating something, you will be doing something wrong. No, the nature is not like that. Actually, the human being can, live in this nature, making use of that. But human being has to know the limits. If the human being doesn't know the limits, then of course what will happen is human beings will destroy along with the nature. Suppose we are cutting all the trees, then what will happen? There will be no rain. Then countries will be deserts. Ultimately, this will be a place that not fit for human beings to live. Then human beings will disappear. Now, who is responsible for that? Human beings themselves. So, it is one thing to say that we need to be behaving morally towards nature. But of course, it is another thing to say that these also have some kind of intrinsic value or something. Because what I'm trying to say is that this distinction of intrinsic value and instrumental value. Instrumental value we can understand. Whatever we use has an instrumental value. To say that something has intrinsic value is, something, according to my understanding, we are attributing some value to it. It is we are human beings who say that it has an instrumental value. Suppose there are no human beings on earth or in the universe, then what? The world will exist. There can be many systems of worlds, many, the planets where no human beings, things, just exist. But the important thing in human beings is human beings can be innovative. They can behave morally. So, the nature of human beings, the nature of the relationship between natural world and the human being is, something very, very interesting. Now, today on the one hand, you can see in the world, the ethical philosophy has developed it has been developed to such an extent we can really come up with ethical philosophy, which is very, very good for human beings and also the world. But the point is where to draw the line, where to draw the limit. Of course, if we think all these things to be, deserving moral consideration, like any other living being, I think we are going towards something impractical. But on the other hand, we really need to look at these things carefully, behave morally and humanely and mildly, but that is for both yourself and also for the future generations and also for the existence of the nature. But this whole thing becomes meaningful in the presence of human beings. If there are no human beings, it doesn't really matter whether there are trees or not, whether there are plants or not. There will be many places in the universe with or without these things. we can't say that, having these things good or having these things bad or anything like that. Because all those concepts, even goodness and badness, are our concepts. We are the people who are conceptualizing these things. Now what I am saying is, in fact, in this moral and ethical discourse, where does the human being belong? Okay. Now some view says that we are the owners, we are the masters, we can do anything. But then as a result of that, we are exploiting the nature, destroying, the logging and all these things. But then what happens is, as a result of that, one day this very earth can be a place that nobody can live. Then you are causing your own destruction. Now if we think that we should live on this earth, then we will have to have the ethical consideration which maintains the balance of the nature. Now we maintain the balance of the nature because also we want to live. I think this human factor we cannot forget. Okay? Otherwise, if no human beings are there, when the last human being is dead, the nature will be whatever. We cannot say whether it is good or bad because we are not there. So, this question how to locate the human being within the nature is something very important. What is the Buddhist position? Now the biblical position was God creating the world and saying, okay, make use of it. All the things that fly, all the things that swim, all the things that walk on the earth is for you. Now then what happens is, that is giving license to unlimited greediness. Okay? You try to make use of all these things as much as you can, and then everything will be destroyed. You will also be destroying the future possibilities of the people are to be born, who are not yet born but who will be born. So therefore we should have really a moderate, considerate attitude towards all these things. In that we are living, making use of the nature, but really without harming the nature either. So it will be a beautiful world. But we cannot really say that, okay, at some point, we really need to consider all these things as some sort of living beings. And then what happens is, like, what is your position? Human beings. If you are to disappear at some point. For example, suppose some kind of insect or animal or evolves to be destroying all human beings. Then one possibility is for us to accept it and get destroyed. Or the other possibility is to resist it. What should we do? For example, the way we behave towards the dengue mosquitoes. Okay? So, these are some of the important ethical problems. Nature is there, but how should the human being be a part of that? Because there are some very interesting, at the same time serious issues. Sometimes scientists are concerned about certain animals that are that become the prey of the other animals. Like, if you look at the forest, deer and the different types of buffaloes are being eaten by tigers and lions. Now, if you want to protect deer, okay, we separate them and put them into a separate place. Then what happens is they start growing and growing and growing and growing. But then if they were in the forest, there will be, the natural way, the tigers and lions will eat them and some others will survive and that sort of thing. The moment human being goes and interferes with that process, it can cause new problems. Okay? Now, if you stop, these animals killing and eating, then how are those animals are going to survive? So the picture has two sides. On the one hand, tigers and lions and those animals have to kill other animals. Okay. Now we can't go to the forest and separate these animals in order to preserve deer. Okay. But then how if some animals disappear? I mean, for me it is again the part of the nature. Part of the nature, because there have been so many animals and so many species living in the world, existing in the world before, but disappeared now. This process will go on. Okay. So how much a human being can interfere with nature is an important question. It depends on how the human being thinks about himself within the nature. Okay. Now importantly, among the all beings in these all categories, particularly according to Buddhism only this category and this category, human beings are the people who can think, who can have a moral view. So it is up to the human being to decide how to behave, how to live, how to be located within this entire atmosphere. So picture of the world is there are human beings, there are animals, there are plants, and there are larger objects like mountains, rivers and all these things. Now in this whole thing, I mean human beings we are small people, right? But then human beings with their mind, with their the developed knowledge, they can do many things with the nature. But then the idea is that you should really do things in order to preserve the integrity of the nature. But according to Buddhism, you do that not because these two aspects have some sort of sentient life, okay? Not because that, but simply because you need to preserve this integrity in order also for you to live, okay? So in a way we can say that this whole thing is an instrumental value, but instrumental value does not mean that you should not have morals and ethics, okay? So the moral and ethical behavior can be extended to trees and plants, rivers and all these things. But why you do that has to be clear in your mind. If you go on the road, if you litter, if you dirt it, that is not good. If you live in a building, if you dirt it, that is not good, But that can be your moral behavior. Not because the building has a life or road has a life or river has a life, but in your own morality, there must be a limit how you should interfere with nature, what you do with the nature, where should you put these things. If you litter, if you put garbage all over the place, ultimately you will never be able to live in that place, okay? So as a result of that, there must be a better way to dispose garbage and so on. So, there is no easy answer to this question, but to decide and to determine how you should be interfering with nature is something, very important part of ethics. So Buddhism will not approve of wanton destruction of any such objects, because such actions are motivated by three roots of akusala. So you should not destroy trees, because those are motivated by lobha dosa moha. But if you want to build a house, or if you want to take as your part of meal, you can grow trees and you can make use of these things. Okay. So that is not really the moral in that sense. What should we do about the environment? The discussion up to this point is why should we have moral standing on environment. We saw various arguments by ethicists supporting that not only human beings but also other sentient beings, trees and plants and even lands need to be included in our moral consideration. The next question is, what should we do to the environment, including all these aspects? Now, next question is, what should we do? Now, earlier we discussed why. Now, in answering this question, ethicists have developed what is called radical ecology or human ecology, outlining how human beings should interact with environment. Now, how should we behave towards nature? Okay, that question. So, in order to answer that question, modern ethical discourse has developed what is called radical ecology or human ecology. Now, this concept of ecology it is something like biology. Ecology means how to understand the nature, how to behave towards nature, ecology. Now, ecology includes the natural functioning of the universe, I mean the world, including the climate and all these things. That is ecology. But when you say ecology, it is a broader concept which involves much more than environment. When we say ecology, we are talking about some kind of study of ecosystem, okay, which includes the discussion of its preservation also. Now, what are these radical ecologies? Scholars who have discussed this matter have identified two common elements in their approach. Mere extending of moral standing to environment is not sufficient. They need to have a broader philosophical perspective requiring fundamental changes in both our attitudes and understanding of reality. These views go beyond ethics and demand changes in society and institutions. Now, when we come to the question of what should we do, it involves two important aspects. Now, one thing is extension of moral standing to environment. Okay, one thing is to develop moral standing, or we can say attitude toward nature. But he said that that is not enough. So, this is a conceptual. And then the second thing is change of attitudes and behavior. Now, in the earlier section we looked at the developed moral standing, but actually what is more important is these views go beyond ethics and demand a change of society and institutions, change of attitudes and behavior of people, society and institutions. Now, the changes have to happen in the people, in the society, and also it means institutions. Institutions means in the institutes, organizations, their policies have to be completely revised in order to accommodate these changes. In other words, what it means is we need to really change our whole perspective of life towards nature. Not only the attitude, we need to develop a good attitude. Accordingly, we also need to do some changes. Now, this aspect of doing some changes, what follows are several approaches dealing with what should we do. Now, one important idea is what is called deep ecology. This idea was presented by Norwegian ethical philosopher Anne Ness. According to him, shallow ecology is anthropocentric and concerned only with pollution and resource completion. In contrast, deep ecology requires an entirely new worldview and new eco-philosophy which they call ecosophy. Now, deep ecology, when we say something is deep, it also necessarily talks about something shallow, not deep. Now, according to them, there are two ways of looking at ecology. Now, some ecologists only look at the pollution of the water, pollution of the air, and then the conservation of the resources, mainly these two aspects. Now, very often we talk about, air pollution, water pollution and, things like that. Now, deep ecologists say that, that is only anthropocentric. Why we consider about air pollution? Because we will not be able to breathe. So it is our concern, they say. And then why do we talk about the conservation of the resources? Because we will not have resources to use. So both these things are centered on us, anthropocentric. So the deep ecologists say that that is not enough. That is not what we need to do. Rather, we need to be doing something totally changing. For example, you can say that we concerned about air pollution and then we try to develop the certain chemicals or whatever in order to prevent it. But what they say is this: if you are interested in air pollution, change your life. Change your life so that you get into simpler form of life. Which is a very important and but at the same time very difficult thing. So what the deep ecologists say is, this mere concern about pollution and resource depletion is not enough. In contrast, deep ecology requires an entirely new worldview and new eco-philosophy. Now, I will just, we will go through this, but very briefly. There are 8 principles of deep ecology. The well-being and flourishing of human, non-human life on earth have value in themselves. Now, this intrinsic value, these values are independent of the usefulness of the non-human world for human purposes. Now, for example, what it says is this: every individual thing, like any animal, any tree, any plant in the universe has its own value. Okay? So therefore, whether it is useful or not, we have to consider everything as having its own value. Now, this is one way of deep ecology looks at. But at the same time, I showed you earlier, what are we going to do with dengue mosquitoes? Are we to consider that dengue mosquitoes have their own value and keep them? Those are some of the difficult ethical questions. Because then if we are to say that, okay, no, we will have to let dengue mosquitoes to grow, and then what happens? Ultimately all human beings will be dead. Now, is that the answer? Anyway, these are some of the questions we can think. Number 2, richness and diversity of life forms contribute to the realization of these values and are also values in themselves. Humans have no right to reduce this richness or diversity except to satisfy vital needs. Of course, it talks about the vital needs. To satisfy vital needs, we can make use of these things, but we don't have right to reduce. The flourishing of human life and culture is compatible with sustainability of smaller population. The flourishing of non-human life requires a smaller human population. Actually, these are very long subjects because we don't have time to discuss. But even, human population control and birth control movements and, all these things are a result of this kind of views. Present human interference with non-human world is excessive and the situation is rapidly worsening. That means human beings are interfering with nature too much. Policies must therefore be changed. These policies affect basic economic, technological and ideological structures. The resulting state of affairs will be deeply different from the present. Number 7, the ideological change will be mainly that of appreciating life quality, dwelling in situations of inherent value, rather than adhering to an increasingly higher standard of living. Because the more we higher our standard of living, more we taking resources from the nature. Now, today it is estimated that about 80% of resources resources are being used by 20% of people in the world. Like rest of the 20% of things are used by all these developing and other countries by 80% of the things, so 80% of the people. Finally, those who subscribe to the foregoing points have an obligation indirectly or indirectly to try to implement the necessary changes. Now these are the fundamental things called fundamentals of what is called deep ecology. So deep ecology is something very well known idea in modern ecological thinking, because what they simply say is you should really go beyond the shallow or superficial consideration only concern human beings' existence, but you have to include the existence of the entire universe into it. So this is what is called deep ecology. And then there is something called social ecology. Like deep ecology, social ecology too holds that the environmental crisis is mainly due to dominant ideology of modern Western societies, and believes that a radical overhaul of the ideology is needed in order to solve the environmental crisis. So they also say that what we call environmental crisis, today we talk about what is called environmental crisis. They say that this crisis is a result of the way of life, particularly in the modern Western societies. Radical overhaul of the ideology, that means the way of thinking, philosophy has to be taken. They find that dominating hierarchical relations in society cause relations between human society and environment to be equally hierarchical. Hierarchy means, going up and up, with gradually increasing power. They say that there are no hierarchies in nature and things in nature are interdependent. Human beings have to know that they are part of nature, that there is an interdependence between human society and the environment. Now, this is a concept that is should be familiar to the Buddhist philosophy, because interdependence is an important aspect of Paticca Samuppada, dependent origination. What they say is, human beings can't be independent. Human beings have to know that they are also dependent on nature. Okay. Now, idea is that, in other words, we need to be very humble. We can't be the masters, we can't be thinking that, okay, everything is for our use. So it shows that, we need to be very humble, know that we also depend on, the nature. Now, this is a very interesting idea, because we can't live without natural objects. We can't live without trees and plants. We can't live without rivers. Now, you remember this Indian idea, Paropakaraya Phalanti Vruksha. The trees bear fruits in order to help us. Now, that's a very beautiful idea. You look at the trees as helping us. You look at the rivers as helping us. You look at the cows as giving us milk. Now, that is a very salutary way of looking at the nature. You look at the nature gratefully. Okay? Now, because without those things you can't live. So the social ecology idea is something very interesting, particularly this should be quite close to the Buddhist understanding. It talks about interdependence of nature. And then we have another idea called ecofeminism. I am just rushing through with this because we don't have much time to go into detail. This view starts by, this is a feminism. Feminism means the women's movement, feminist movement. Now, it says that by critiquing how social domination by men is extended to the domination of the environment. Now, feminism is concerned about the status of women. Now, feminists say that, look at the society. In the society, men dominate women. Okay. Now, they say that as men dominate women, also men dominate the nature. Okay. Men dominate the nature, extend to the domination environment. Feminists who hold this view see an affinity between them, women who are dominated by men and the nature equally dominated by the same men. Like deep ecology and social ecology, ecofeminism too demands a total overhaul of the dominant Western ideology. Now, the feminist women rights people say that, look at the society, men dominate women. They say that in the same manner, it is men who dominate the nature. Actually, this domination of nature concept, the people going to countries and it comes from, as I showed you in the very early, the biblical assertion of God saying, okay, you dominate it. The nature is given to human beings. So we think that we can do anything with nature, cultivate it, destroy it, any manner. But that arrogance can be very damaging. Now, ecofeminists say that, look, men have the same attitude towards the nature. So they say that ultimately we will have to change this the situation dominated by men. So the same. Like deep ecology and social ecology, ecofeminism too demands a total overhaul of the dominant Western ideology. Some ecofeminists lay emphasis on the things that link natural world and women. They claim that women have a much closer relationship to the natural world due to their capacity for childbearing. Actually, some ecofeminists say that more than men, women are closer to the nature. Women can understand the nature much better, because the feminists argue that only women have the capacity to bear a child. Now, the relationship between mother and child and bearing a fetus in your womb for close to 9 months, the woman's mentality is different, and they say that women look at the nature in a different manner. In other words, what they say is this: if the women were the people who are making policies of the countries, say like leaders, the attitude towards nature will be different. The way people treat nature will be different. This is the ecofeminist view. Now, when we look at all these three views, we can see that all three views have something in common, namely that ultimately the way of life has to be changed in order to have a better ecology. Looking from a Buddhist perspective, there is something in all three standpoints that goes along with Buddhism well. That is, the need for the change of attitudes, philosophies and the world views in order to find a solution to the environmental crisis. Now, this fundamental thing is very, very close to Buddhism, because ultimately in Buddhism, we believe that in order to achieve the noble path, you have to change your life. You have to live a different life. So changing the life. Now this is not only philosophical, ultimately it is a practical thing. Okay? Changing the way of life. Not only attitudes, changing the way of life. So now that is a very, concept that is very close to, very dear to and very near to Buddhist philosophy. So the philosophies and worldviews. The awareness of the interdependence between human beings and nature, and the resultant humanity is the point valued in Buddhism. The other thing is interdependence, like our dependence on nature. Actually, we can't say nature depends on us in a way, because if all human beings disappear, trees and plants and mountains will be there, right? We can't say that the natural things depend on us. But we as human beings, we depend on those things, right? So if we destroy nature, we will not be able to live. So at least in order to survive, we need to be caring about nature. So the dependence, so this aspect. Since environmental crisis is a man-made problem, the solution to the problem also lies in human being himself. Now, this idea that man-made problem, there are problems made by man. Now, what we consider to be environmental crisis is because of the behavior of the people, the way people have treated. Now, the cutting forest and deforestation, all these things ultimately could cause environmental damage and no raining, and a lot of things are happening. Global warming today, we are talking quite a lot about global warming. All these various factors, because there are so many factories, and they emit a lot of the fumes to the environment. So as a result, they talk about global warming. Some of the the extremely cool areas where the icy rocks are, they are melting, in a very rapid manner. So now these things, unless they are arrested, they are stopped, they will continue, and one day the climate of the world will be changed. Interesting thing is, it goes like in Buddhism we are told that ultimately 7 suns will appear and world will be burned. Now global warming is the moving towards that direction. The globe is becoming warmer and warmer and warmer. One day it will be so warm that we will not be able to live here. So that will be the end. So in that sense, environmental crisis is a man-made problem. If the problem is man-made, the solution also has to be man-made. Solution to the problem also lies in human being. Although there can be finer points of difference, Buddhist philosophy seems moving well along with these new forms of radical ecology. So the conclusion is, although there can be differences, if you take this what is called radical ecology, deep ecology, social ecology, and ecofeminism, it seems that Buddhist ideas seem to go along, the comparable with these ideas. Okay, folks, basically from this discussion, I'm sorry I had to rush through the last part of the discussion, but I think we discussed something very important today, environmental philosophy. Now, one thing I showed to you is, there are so many modern views, and then if we look at these things from a Buddhist point of view, we can see that some of these modern ideas go along with Buddhist ideas. Okay, there are some fundamental differences, but then also there are some very important comparisons. Okay, so particularly when you look at the change of attitude and the behavior, ultimately, this is how it has to be. Not only when people change their attitudes and behavior, the social things and also institutions also change. Now, without change of institutions, ultimately changes will not happen. But institutions will not be changing unless human beings have not changed. So, again, these two things go together. Now, ultimately the idea is that there is what is called environmental crisis today. There is a problem today we are facing because some of the things we have done, particularly for the last 100 years, has been very much damaging for the nature. Now the time has come to correct it. Entire environmental philosophy is to look for resources, the concepts, ideas, how to make this correct. Okay. So as a result, people have looked at different religions, different systems, and come up with ideas. So I reviewed some of those ideas with you last week and also this week. And being Buddhist and being group of people who are studying Buddhism, you must be able to understand this what is called environmental crisis through Buddhist point of view and try to see what Buddhism can suggest as a solution to these problems. Okay, folks, I will wind up from that. Do you have any questions or comments or anything? One thing I will do tomorrow morning in this same session is I will be giving you a summary of everything we discussed. So we can again, if you have any questions, we can again discuss tomorrow morning also because winding up, I will be giving a summary of these things. But No questions. Okay, bring up questions then tomorrow morning. We will wind up for today. Thank you very much for participating.